Well, hi everyone. I'm Pastor Alex. Welcome to Crossroads Church, Fort Lupton. How are you doing? Doing good? That's awesome. I like that. If you've been with us, you know that we're in a series that we're calling Christianity for the Curious, Cautious, and Confused. And so the idea is there's just a whole lot of curiosity, maybe caution or confusion about Christianity and what it even is. And so we've been just going through some basic things. Trying to just go through them and get on the same page about what's going on, right? And so, if you're new here, hopefully this has been something that's been informative and helpful. And if you're here regularly, maybe you've been a Christian for a long time, I hope this has also been a series to maybe just be a refresher, reminder, maybe you're learning cool new things, or just giving you language that makes it easier to talk about these sorts of things. And so this week, we're going to keep going along, and we're going to talk about what is the gospel. Like I've said a couple times, there's a Baptist university that did a study, and they came to the conclusion that about 4% of Americans actually know what the gospel is. And that if you go into a church, that you'll typically run into about 10% of people who will actually know what the gospel is. And so what we're going to do today is just talk through what in the world is the gospel. Or another way you could phrase it is, what is Christianity all about? And as we begin, I'm just going to say something that might be, a hot take, if you want to call it that. But one of my pet peeves, if you hang out with me outside of church, that I talk about all the time, and maybe you know this, maybe you think this, or you know people who think this, is a lot of times they think that Christianity is just all about going to heaven. Maybe that's something you think, and that's okay if you're there, but I want to give the challenge that that's not what Christianity is actually all about. That there's actually a whole lot more that the story of the Bible and the God of the Bible is trying to do when he talks about salvation. Now, do Christians believe in heaven? Absolutely we do. Do we believe in some sort of an afterlife? Absolutely we do. We believe for sure that Jesus rose from his grave promising that we have life after death. But what the Bible tells us is that when God thinks about what's wrong with this world, it's a lot bigger than, we just die. And that when he's trying to think big picture of how he's going to save the world, it's a lot bigger than heaven. And the problem is, like I said, heaven is a part of the Christian message. It's a part of the story. But when we look at the gospel and Christianity as just, we say a prayer, and now Jesus forgiven us, and now we can go to heaven, what we end up doing, or can make the mistake of doing, is start making Christianity all about us. I don't know about you, but I remember when I was younger, I was here, Pastor Kim was preaching. He asked the question, I've heard a lot of pastors actually ask this over the years, but they'll say, think of yourself in heaven and in paradise. Do you see God there? And I remember as a young person being like, when I think of paradise, I don't know that I do think of God there. And I've seen so many Christians sit in churches and hear this challenge and be like, I don't actually know that when I think of this paradise or I think of this heaven, if God is there. And they feel guilty. Maybe you've heard this question and it's made you feel guilty. But I want to make the argument that part of why we find ourselves in this conundrum is because when we're taught to just come to God solely for the fact that you'll get to go to heaven someday, we're getting this gospel that's all about ourselves. It's not actually about God. It's not actually about God's master plan. It's just saying, go to God so that you can get something that you want. And now don't get me wrong, I think God offers us something that we want. But as we go through the Bible today and really talk about the gospel and what is Christianity all about, I think we're going to find that heaven is a part of the Christian message, but it's just a small piece, and that God's plan of salvation, God's plan for our world and for his people is so much bigger and grander and far more amazing and deeper. So what do you say? Are you ready to speed read the Bible in 30 minutes? Yeah? All right. So before we start, can we all give a round of applause for Isaiah? So this is Isaiah's first time running production all on his own, and I've given him 5 billion Bible verses to put on the screen. Oh my gosh. So I'm sure he's going to do a great job. But we're going to nerd out again today. So if we want to really go through what is Christianity about, what is the Bible trying to tell us about God and his story, we've got to start at the beginning of the story. So we're going to start at Genesis 1, And we're going to read verses 1 through 2 real fast. So it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this because this is a story for a whole nother day, but just, you have to remember, Genesis isn't trying to do what so many people try to make it do. Genesis and the whole Bible is trying to tell us something about God and his story and his people. And so I've heard so many times, God's hovering over waters. I thought he's about to create things. Like, why is there water here? Because it's trying to tell you something different than just that God is creating. It's trying to tell you something about God. And rule of thumb, this isn't always true, but majority of the time when you see water, or especially the ocean or seas in the Old Testament, sometimes the New, the Israelites, they don't like water. They don't like the ocean, right? It's dangerous, it's scary, it can kill you, and it's not good for living. You can't live on the ocean or in the ocean. And so typically when you see waters in this context, it's trying to talk about chaos. And so what they're trying to say is that at the beginning of God's story and his story with the world, he created everything and he's hovering over waters. In other words, he's looking at everything that exists and it's chaos. It's not good for living. So what does he start to do? He starts creating and making it better, organizing, right? So it's less chaotic. So day one, there's light and darkness. Okay, that's good. And then he goes and he separates water from water. Again, this was written 6,000 years ago. The Genesis 1 is not about cosmology, it's about the power of God. Him, through his voice, has the power to create life. He has the power to create cosmos. He's a far greater God or king than any other ruler on the world. That's what Genesis wants you to understand. So, what he's doing in day 2, he separates water from water. And so it says, so then there's water above and there's water below, right? They thinking, why is the sky blue? Well, there's water up there. Why does it rain? Well, there's water up there. And you say, well, that's not right. It's not what the Bible's trying to do right now. God's creating a world that is good for life. So then what does he do in the next day? He separates all the water so it pools to one place so that you have ground. And then, after he does this, you get a phrase in Genesis 1 that we're going to start hearing over and over. So we're going to nerd out. Can you say this word with me? It's 2 Hebrew words. It's ki tov. Ki tov. So whenever you see in Genesis 1, and then it was good, usually it says God looked at what he did and saw that it was good, and it was good. It's in Hebrew, it's ki tov. That's what he's saying. So then, as soon as he creates dry land, so he separates the water, and now there's land, all of a sudden you get this phrase, ki tov. God looked at what he did and said it was ki tov. It's good. And then what happens? He keeps categorizing, separating, and before you know it, as he's doing stuff, by the end of Genesis 1, you have life in the sky. You have life on the ground. You have plants. You have animals. You even have life in the water. That chaotic, crazy, dangerous place, there's even life there. Genesis 1 is trying to tell you everything God does is good. And God tells us that. He looks at what he's doing and he says it's ki tov. Why? Because after everything he does, the world is better and better for the flourishing of life. It's ki tov. So then he gets through just about to the end, and he looks at the world, and he sees things flying in the sky. He sees things living on the ground. He sees things swimming and living in the ocean, and he says, it's very good. It's very ki tov. He looks at the world that he's been creating, and it is just abundant and flourishing with life, and it's awesome. And then he decides he's going to do one more thing. So we skip all the way to verse 26, still in Genesis 1. And he says this, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over the livestock, and over all the earth." In other words, of all the living things that are now flourishing on the world that I've created, I'm going to create one more creature that's going to be like me, and they're going to rule over this beautiful ki tov world that I've made. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, you shall have them for food." In other words, God creates humans in his image. Now, when we talk about being God's image, you can hear all sorts of different things in church, right? Well, that's why we have rational thought. That was a big thing, right? Or that's why we're special. That means there's something about us that just makes us better than everything else. And those things are true. We are rational and we are special in God's eyes. But 6,000 years ago, when the Bible was written, the Genesis 1 is providing social commentary on everything going on in the world. See, if someone used the phrase image of God, they weren't talking about, well, I'm a rational being, or God thinks I'm special. If you were the image of God, what you were saying is I'm fit to be a ruler on this world. See, if you read any other creation myth in ancient Mesopotamia, they're all very different than the Bible. How the majority of them go is you have a pantheon of gods, and one of them decides he wants to be king. So he goes on a conquest and invent a bunch of different variations, more or less. He goes and slaughters every other god. It's not beautiful. It's actually usually incredibly violent. This one God will decide, I'm going to kill all the others. And the story's different, but for the theme, for the sake of today, what typically happens is this one God will then take the carcasses of all the ones that he's killed and will then create the world. If you go and read other creation stories written around the time that Genesis was written, that's how they normally go. There's a one God who decides he's going to be king, he kills a bunch of the other ones, and then he creates the rest of the world. And then they usually just create one special person who's made in the image of God. Not all people, just one. And that person is the king, whether it's Pharaoh or the king of Mesopotamia or whatever. And so, they didn't have elections like we have today. Right now we have leaders. Why? Because we elected them. Back then, you were a leader if you were made in the image of God. So in other words, these people would say, I am in charge because I'm so powerful and because I was put here by God to be God on the earth. And so that's why you do what I say. And if you don't like that, then the same God that killed all the other gods is going to give me the power to do that to you. So you sit down, you shut up, you pay your taxes, and you do what I say because I'm in the image of God. And Genesis comes and starts describing a God that's far more powerful than any of those other gods. He doesn't need to slaughter anyone to become king. He's just so powerful that he actually created everything. If there's any other being in existence, it's here because this God made them, because he's so powerful. He doesn't need to fight for supremacy. He has supremacy because he built it all. But then this God says, there is no just special ruling class, and the rest of humanity is meant to just serve and bow down to them. This God said, actually, I created all humans to be in my image. And then I gave them a command, men and women, to be rulers of this world. But not to just go around and be bullies, not to just go around and throw around their power and the weight however they want. They're supposed to be like God, to rule over everything that's living, right? In other words, he wants them to see that what's ki tov is walking around and making the world better for life, so that in all we do, it should be ki tov. In all we do, we should do something that makes the world better and better for the flourishing of life. Because God has defined what is good and what's wrong. And what's good is what's tov. And what's tov makes the world better for life. And he says, having one guy sitting on top of the throne, pushing everyone else around, isn't ki tov. But it's all of humanity living in accordance with the God who made it all and living how he's called them to live. Go around and spread ki tov. Last week we called this goodness in action, and all we do, we should be making the world better and better for living. But let's go to Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat any tree in the garden'?" Now notice, we just read this. God gave humans a command. Go, be fruitful, multiply, and rule over the world. Rule over everything that I've created and make it ki tov. Make the world better. This is something humans are really good at, right? We can go into a forest or into open ground and we can create orchards. I don't know if you know this, but an apple tree on its own is actually really terrible at making apples. But if humans tend to apple trees and create an orchard, we can create apple trees, a whole field of apple trees that can support more life. Like, it's amazing. This is what they're sent off to do. And he tells them right afterwards, I don't know if you remember, and every tree, every piece of foliage that produces fruit, you can eat that. In other words, God's saying everything you need to go and do what I've asked you to do has been provided for you. Don't worry about, well, God, I can't, because what am I going to eat? How am I going to help make the world better when I've got to figure out how to eat each day? Put a meal on the table. And God says, everything you need, I provide for you. And this serpent, the first thing they ask of people who are going and living out this calling in the garden, he's saying, did God actually give you everything that you need? That's what he's trying to ask here. Like, God's put you on a mission to keep and tend this garden, tend this world, but then he didn't give you what you needed to do it. And she responds, And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden." So she's saying, no, that's not true. He actually has given us what we need to do this. But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden." It's just this one tree that we can't eat of. We can eat of everything else. "Neither shall you touch it, lest you die." Which is interesting, because God never actually said they couldn't touch it. So she is responding to the serpent kind of correctly. She's saying, no, he has given us what we need, but she's also adding to what God has said. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil, tov and ra." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Something incredibly important has happened right here. So when you're reading Genesis 1 over and over and over, you see God moving and acting and continually saying, he saw what he did and said it was ki tov, ki tov, ki tov. God saw and it was ki tov. It was good for life. It was good for life. And now you have human. And this is for the first time, human looking at something that's evil. But what do they say? So when the woman saw that the tree was tov for food, she ate it. Humans, this is where we went wrong. We looked out at the world, and rather than saying what's tov is what God calls tov, she looks at something that's evil, something that's ra. That's how you say evil in Hebrew. And she decides what's evil is ki tov. And she takes it and she eats. And you turn the page to chapter 4, and her son kills her other son. And you turn the next page into chapter 5, and God looks out into the world that is so violent and evil that he says he's regretted even creating mankind. This is the problem that Genesis is trying to tell. The story of God, the story that the Bible tells us starts with this problem. God is so powerful and he's so good that everything he does produces ki tov, and life flourishes. But then humans, whose job it is to rule this world under God and live ki tov, looks at what's evil and says it's good. And so our world burns. And for pages and pages and pages and pages. God is on a mission to save our world from the fact that we live according to what's evil because we call what's evil good. And God continually promises throughout the Bible that he's going to give us a leader, a nation, a ruler who will save us from a world full of rulers who call what's evil good. But they continually fail over and over and over and over and over and over and over until we get to the New Testament. And you get to Mark chapter 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. All right, you ready to learn another nerdy word? We're going to learn Greek now. We're going to learn the word euangelion. Euangelion. Not that it's Greek, that's why it sounds weird. Hebrew sounds better sometimes. But this word euangelion is the Greek word where we get this word gospel from. Other times it's translated good news. So when you're in the New Testament and you see the word gospel, you see the word good news, it's probably the Greek word euangelion, right? And so euangelion, if you're an ancient Greek person, means something very special. Like if someone came proclaiming, we have a euangelion, they usually came saying a new ruler is in power. Caesar's been murdered by another Caesar. So euangelion, good news, there's a new king now, right? So-and-so has been killed by so-and-so. There's a new king now. Euangelion, we have a new king. Jesus walks onto the scene, the beginning of the real euangelion, the coming of Jesus Christ as king, the Son of God. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Lord is a word for king, ruler, someone who's in charge. Make his path straight. Jesus is coming to be a king. He is God incarnate, coming to do what we can't. This king is going to be the true king of Israel, and not like those ones of the past that destroyed things because they did what everyone else did. Even David, who's supposed to be the most awesome king of Israel, eventually gets to a point where he declares what's evil is good, and so Israel burns. And Isaiah spends so much time explaining they're burning because the rulers of Israel keep declaring what's evil is good. And these rulers are coming who are foreigners, and they're destroying you and oppressing you and taking advantage because they're rulers who call what's evil good. But someday I'm going to send you a king who's not like them. He's going to come, and he's going to actually be a king of peace and justice because he'll call what's good, good, and what's evil, evil. And Jesus comes onto the scene saying this. So this is verse 14. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee. So Jesus has just been baptized by the guy who's making way, the path for Jesus to come. And so he's beginning his ministry. And so after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee proclaiming the gospel, the euangelion, the good news that a new king's in power of God, saying, the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the good news, in the euangelion. And what's the good news? What's the gospel? That king is finally here. The kingdom of God. The kingdom that's led by the one true ruler who calls what's good, good, and what's evil, evil is here. And this nation's going to be unlike any other nation because it won't be led by a ruler who decides what's evil is good and run everything into the ground. That's what Jesus is coming to do. He's coming to bring a kingdom into our world led by him that won't be led by a ruler who calls what's evil good. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, that's the problem. That's the problem in our own lives. We were all built by God to be rulers in this world. Maybe we don't lead nations. Maybe we don't lead armies. But we lead our own lives. And how often do we call what's evil good, and so we watch our lives burn and just flat-faced right into the ground. We destroy relationships. We destroy the lives of people around us. Maybe we don't phrase it that way. That's a dramatic way of saying it. But at the end of the day, we all know we decide that things that are bad are good. And so we live the way we shouldn't. And our lives are a mess. We start breaking relationships with other people. We start making other people's lives a mess. And this might surprise you, but even those people who are made rulers of nations decide that what's evil is good. And they run towns, communities, countries into the ground. Have you ever heard of this happening? That's right. Turn on the news, and it's full of people deciding that what's evil is good, and so our world burns. And Jesus says, I've come to end the cycle. I am a king who's come to rule by declaring what's good is good and what's evil, evil, and not getting them mixed up. So let's jump to the end. Let's go to Revelation 21. Everyone likes reading Revelation in church, right? Yeah? So this is Revelation 21. This is where we're getting to the completion of God's plan. Starting in verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven, the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Is there no ocean at the end? I think there probably is. Maybe there's not. But again, what's the sea? What's the ocean? It's chaos. Our world is chaos when God is not in charge. And what the Bible is promising right here is there is going to be a time where God comes and the chaos that runs our world will be no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne where kings sit, saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, not somewhere distant, not somewhere we can't get to him, but with us. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God, as their king, as their ruler. He will wipe every tear away from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. The NIV translates this, the old order of things have passed away. In other words, a world led by leaders who call what's evil good, the world doesn't work that way anymore. God is going to be seated on a throne that is on earth with his people, and no longer will evil rule our world. This is God's promise. And when this happens, there's no more crying, there's no more weeping, there's no more pain, there's no more death, because we don't live in such a way in which we destroy life anymore. Everyone lives under a way that is ki tov. We live according to God's rule, and everything he does makes life grow. He makes life spread. He makes life flourish. The old order of things, of us calling what's evil tov and destroying things, it's gone. And now it's God with his people, leading the world the way it's meant to be led, and there's no more destruction. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. He's not making new things. He's making all things that are here new. This is the promise of God. His hope isn't just that we'll die someday and he can take us away from the chaos. His plan is to remove the chaos from our world and to make everything that's been destroyed, everything that's been broken, new. And why this is important is because no one else can do this. You see, if I take this book and I begin to rip it to shreds, I can go get some tape and I can kind of put it back together. It's never going to be new again. If I just take a page out and I crumple it up, I can flatten it out, but that page is never going to be the same again, right? How many of you have kids with toys and they break it and they come to you and they put it in front of your face? They don't even say anything. They fix it, right? Just some glue and, be gentle with it because it's not like it once was, right? You fixed it, but it's not new anymore. It's never going to be the same. And God's promise is that when he completes his work, he's going to go into what's broken and make it new again. He's not going to destroy and start over. He's going to come into our world, remove the destruction and the chaos, and completely and totally heal. Just like what happened to Jesus. He was a man who was broken and destroyed by leaders who declared that what's evil is good. And they murdered him in public to declare who's the real king. But Jesus, who came declaring, I'm the true king. And mind you, while he was on that cross, he had a crown on his head. Above him was written, here's Jesus, King of the Jews, which is the nation that's supposed to save the whole world. And the leaders look at him and say, really? We're in charge. But Jesus walks out of his grave, proving this is possible. We are made in the image of God, and we have the ability to go into the world and spread Tov and make the world better for life. But we can't make what's dead living, but God can. Jesus walked out of his grave healed. He was broken, but he walked out new. His heart had stopped. It walked out beating, promising someday the chaos will be removed from our world and all things will be made new. Do you see the difference between this message of hope versus just someday you'll die and you're just going to be in paradise? This is far more robust. This is far deeper. Do we believe in heaven? Do we believe that God saves us after death? Absolutely. But not to just send us to some shallow paradise, but he promises us a world removed of chaos, made new and healed. To just remove us and bring us into some paradise completely ignores the fact that we have all experienced evil. We've done evil, and we've had evil done to us. And we have scars on the inside, and we have scars on the outside. And God's not saying, I'm just going to pull you out of that world, and we're just going to forget about it. He's saying, I am going to remove the powers that be that make our world this way, and then I'm going to give us a world that isn't that way anymore. And I'm going to heal everything that's been broken. The message, the good news of salvation is about so much more than paradise someday. It's a message about God coming and making everything like new. Not forgetting about the past by numbing us with some paradise, but about removing the chaos from the world, healing every scar, and then living in the presence of God who rules his kingdom perfectly. And if you don't want in this kingdom, you don't have to be there. But if you can acknowledge that Jesus is who he says he is, the king of this perfect kingdom, then he says, enter, follow me. And if we do, our promise is we will live in this kingdom forever. And someday, this kingdom is going to be over the whole world. The old order of things are going to pass away, and we will live under God who knows what's tov and knows what's evil, and he rules with goodness, and his people live with goodness. This is the Christian hope. This is good news. Our world is broken, but it won't always be this way. This world is full of evil that we carry out and that's done to us. And God is promising more than just, let me get you out and numb that. He is offering true healing. And Jesus is a reminder that this is possible because he came onto this world a man, living, breathing man. and he has evil done to him to the point that he dies. And he doesn't just die, he dies from a brutal murder from the powers that be. A Roman magistrate and Jewish religious leaders made sure he died. Jesus came saying, I'm the king that will save you, and the kings on thrones in Rome and in Israel butchered him. But Jesus walked out of his grave. We believe this message not because the Bible says so, but because Jesus walked out of his grave healed. And so we have hope, not a hope like, man, I hope I get a car for Christmas, but hope as in, I know what tomorrow brings, and I can't wait for it to come. God's promise of salvation is that the world will not always be as it is right now. And once the world is fixed, it's not just that, well, at least things are better now, but we'll undergo healing. He will make all things new because he's not like us. He has that kind of power to make life and to fix life. Do you see what I'm saying? This is so much bigger than just heaven. Do we believe in heaven? Absolutely. But our true hope is that someday our world will be fixed, God will be the one and only King, and all things will be made new. Amen.